I don't know, is this stage 2, part 2? Tell me about how the Reconciliation Committee has worked and what we're doing here now.
Okay, well, our title is Remembrance and Reconciliation. And those are two distinct processes or phases. They aren't, one and then the other. They do overlap and blend. But the first part of our work, which has gone on since 2020, did focus on remembrance. And so we have learned the history. We have worked to display a marker in the downtown which tells the story. It is the remembrance part of our work, and we will continue to do that. As someone has said, we don't ever quit trying to remember because there are many folks who haven't heard the word and don't remember. So we will continue that work. But we wanted to move on to reconciliation, which is really a conversation. Reconciliation comes with face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball conversations among folks and working to eliminate disparities and residuals of the impact of those terrible events in the past. They are remembered by folks today. They have their lasting impact, and we need to work to cross the boundaries and build bridges to those who may have been harmed or hurt or still concerned about what happened in the past. So this is the sort of the second phase of our work.
And tonight's the first step towards that. You're going to do many of these in the...
Well, it's not the very first. In some ways, the sculpture itself became a way of provoking conversation. So at those places where the sculpture has been displayed, there have already been some conversations. Welfare Baptist Church and the Pendleton Library and the AnMed Health and the Anderson University. So those groups have been having some of these. This is the first sort of general public kind of event that we've held. And we're grateful to Beverly Childs of the museum here for, first of all, for putting a display of the 5 jars of soil. I mean, that's an important part of the remembrance, and it will be there permanently as a reminder. But she wanted to go further and have not just a display in the building, but a conversation. So that's what we're here for tonight.
And there'll be some more of these in the future at various places?
We'll have more. The Boulevard Church is sponsoring some in the next 2 or 3 weeks, conversations, and we'll perhaps have a Juneteenth program, and who knows what other groups we will involve in that process.
Great. Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah. How's everybody doing? Yeah. So does my voice carry pretty well?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
yes.
So if we have to pass the microphone around a little bit, we'll do so. But I typically am kind of like an old Baptist preacher where I just like to move around a little bit. I don't like to stay in the same spot, if that's okay. First things first, I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Bobby Ratu. I am very fortunate and blessed to be amongst some really, really smart people here tonight. We have a goal, and we're hoping to tell a little bit of a story. We have been putting on events. Well, really not me. This group of people right here has an effort that's been going on for a while. And so the goal here tonight is to kind of educate and have a conversation, if that's okay. A little bit of this I'm going to read, if that's okay, just to make sure I get my history correct. I'm used to just talking free flow, so I apologize when I read some of this information. The first thing I would like to do to kind of get us going is just give you context why we're here. And first things first, I joined this organization, was recruited or just slightly asked to join in one evening at Welfare Baptist Church. And it was the first event where the sculpture, as we call it, was unveiled. Stuart Sprague usually calls me and asks me for a favor. And whenever he asks me for a favor, I usually respond because my wise mentor usually knows that Whenever he presents something that I would be interested in, he knows I'll lock my teeth into it, so to speak. This event was at Welfare Baptist Church a few years ago, and it was the unveiling of the sculpture. My background is a documentary storyteller. That's what my craft is. That's what I practice, and that's what I teach. And so I spend my time telling stories across South Carolina, North Carolina, across the Southeast. And when I walked into the door of Welfare, I experienced this unbelievable celebration memorial. And I couldn't really understand at first what it was all about. But as I sat there and took pictures and listened, I felt the energy in the room. And then as we walked out and watched the unveiling, it made me realize something really important. There's a big story to tell. And the story comes from many different perspectives, many different viewpoints. And so tonight I hope that we kind of walk you through a historical aspect of how this came to be. How did it come to be that a sculpture that went around and visited so many different places in the community, an energy of talking about 5 names of 5 people, a marker that was installed downtown to memorialize 5 people, and how this conversation started. And so as a storyteller, I hope that we can do that tonight. Let me give you a little bit of background, if that's okay. First, in the summer of 2020, a group of 6 people formed a steering committee, launched the Anderson Area Remembrance and Reconciliation Initiative. The 6 people are Mr. Ancoma Anderson, Mr. Rusty Burns, Mr. John Miller, Mr. Terence Roberts, Ms. Juana Slade, and Mr. Stuart Sprague. Since 2020, they've been building a coalition of interested people. I would consider y'all interested people. You're here interested tonight. Their goal is to remember the victims of 5 individuals that were a part or victims of racial terror lynching. Now, in many ways, we use these words in different ways. Many people use the word lynching. And we're still trying to understand what that word means. Many people have a viewpoint that when we hear the word lynching, we imagine one thing. But really, as we've gone through these stories, we've learned it's so much more. As a part of this initiative in this journey, they became partners with a group called the Equal Justice Initiative down in Montgomery, Alabama. The Equal Justice Initiative was founded in 1989 by Mr. Brian Stevenson, a public interest lawyer, best-selling author for Just Mercy. If anybody's seen the movie or read the book, absolutely a must. It is a private 501c3 organization that provides legal representation to people who have been illegally convicted, unfairly sentenced, or abused in state jails or prisons. They also work with communities that have been marginalized by poverty, discouraged by unequal treatment, and are committed to changing the narrative about race in America. They recently launched a national effort to create new spaces, markers, memorials that address the legacy of slavery, racial terror lynching, and racial segregation. In addition to the museum and the memorial that opened in Montgomery, Alabama, the EJI sponsors community remembrance projects in local communities across the United States. These involve persons in each community work to memorialize the incidents of lynchings of black citizens in the past. Narratives of each event are prepared, soil is gathered, and sites near where sites near the incidents where they think the incidents occurred. As we hear more, we'll learn that that's really hard to do. That's really hard to do. Displays of the soil collection are prepared and maintained as a reminder of the past and the encouragement to build what Dr. Martin Luther King considers the beloved community. 5 black victims of lynching here in Anderson County have been identified. From a period of 1894 to 1911, an AARNRI, or Anderson Area Remembrance and Reconciliation, has been working on memorializing these individuals, telling their story. Here are their names. Mr. Edward Sullivan, Mr. Elbert Harris, Mr. John Laddison, Mr. Reuben Elrod, and Mr. Willis Jackson. AARNRI is at work in Anderson County to raise awareness, to foster dialogue, to educate and encourage conversations that will acknowledge the past, but more importantly, look forward to a time when true fellowship prevails among people of all races in our community. 2 projects have been initiated which advance these efforts. One is displayed right here in Anderson County Museum. If you go out that door, there are 5 jars, each representing each victim. There's also a sculpture that now sits at Anderson University and Thrift Library on the 2nd floor. And that was funded in part in partnership with Duke Energy. We hope tonight's discussion will foster more intentional conversations as a part of a movement that we talk about very dearly: remembrance and reconciliation. Those 2 terms are really, really important. And it's something that Dr. Sprague is going to talk about in just a second. But before we can reconcile or start that process, we must remember. And remembrance is understanding, listening, researching, listening, and hearing. We know the difference, don't we? Many times we listen, but we don't hear. It's up to us to hear. Tonight, this panel discussion will help us explore the concept of the beloved community. And so what I'm going to do is basically introduce each person and then ask them a question, if that's okay. And our goal tonight is to let them share through these questions, and as we get to the end, maybe take upon some other questions from the group to see if you have any interest or something that you would like to clarify or learn more about. Maybe you'll hear something that sparks interest. Maybe you have something to share with us that we can learn from you. At the end of the day, this is about community dialogue. At the end of the day, this is our beloved community. And it's up to us to have these important conversations in ways that represent what Dr. Martin Luther King says. First of all, Dr. Sprague, please introduce yourself. And then I would love for you to explain the vision behind the phrase of AARNRI, Remembrance and Reconciliation. And
Okay. I'm Stuart Sprague. I was for 20 years a professor at Anderson University. And then I moved to the AnMed Health organization, and for 24 years I was a teacher of residents in training, teaching medical ethics and communication skills and other assorted ventures. It was a wonderful career, 2 wonderful jobs, 2 wonderful groups of people to associate with. Well, that's who I am, I guess. The AARNRI started in 2020, though it actually was an idea that was fostered several years before that. But the idea is that I'm old enough to remember what life was like under Jim Crow segregation. I grew up in Louisiana, in a little bitty town in the Louisiana Delta, surrounded by fields of cotton. And I knew firsthand from that experience, but it took my moving away from that and looking back at it. When I was in high school, I moved to St. Louis, Missouri. And there I could gain a little perspective on what was simply taken for granted, I guess, by the society in which I first grew up, that there were distinctions to be made and assignments of roles in the society. And once I was out of that environment, I began to say, maybe that's not how it should be. And my sister had been involved in work like that as well. She was a minister in Austin, Texas. And so when I became aware of the Equal Justice Initiative, I said, you know, the work they're doing in these community remembrance projects is very important. I'm living in a community where we want to foster that kind of relationship. And so there were 6 of us who started on this journey together, and it's been a wonderful experience. I've gotten to know some people very well and appreciate so much all of them and the work that they have done. But then we've met others in the process of reaching out. And so Herman Keith, the artist, and leaders of various organizations in the community have all responded. And the key is that the reconciliation that is needed cannot happen by itself. We can't simply say, gee, there are disparities here, there's a history here, let's just all be buddies and forget about the past. It's not that we want to point fingers or assign blame. It's simply that the past lingers on in many different ways. There is such a thing as institutional racism, despite the claims of some that that's not true. And we have to be honest about that. And the source of that was racial terror, lynching, and lots of other things that happened in the past. And we can only overcome that by being honest about what it was, but then also being honest about our desire to move forward. And so we begin with remembrance, we move toward reconciliation, and we hope that this is a process that will go on for years and years and into the future. It will never end, to be honest. We can't ever get to the end of the need to reconcile. So we are a humble group of folks doing work to alert the community, and we're glad to have you here to hear the story. Please look at the exhibit. Please participate in sculpture events. We have a list of an email list, and you can be on that and find out about our work. And so welcome to the journey.
So I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
All right.
So this is a discussion that Dr. Sprague and I have all the time. When do we move from remembrance to reconciliation? And you talked about that a little bit. And we've had this discussion about different people remember and reconcile at different pieces.
Well, I think it has to do, first of all, with the fact that memories vary quite a lot. Some are quite painful. And so we have to be honest that some things that we remember are horrible and may have created a kind of resistance or insulation, or people walling off and saying, I'm not sure I can remember that. Reconciling is a conversation. It's face-to-face. It's not something you can do over Zoom. It's not something you do with a book. You have to be in the same room and talk to each other. There's no sharp line between those. They overlap. I don't think we ever quit remembering, and I don't think we ever quit reconciling. It's two things that go on all the time. And so there aren't sharp differences between them. But the first step has to be, let's be honest. Let's tell the truth. And once we've done that, then we can move on to where does that truth lead us.
How does remembering 5 victims of racial terror lynching here in Anderson County intersect with health and equity of the community?
Thanks. But in all seriousness, I think your question means a lot to me in light of what I do for a living. I work at the hospital system. I'm a diversity officer, and I've been in the field of diversity and inclusion for the last 25 years officially and 28 years unofficially. And one of the things that motivated me about this work has to do with the fact that I'm an African American female. I acknowledge the fact, while I don't know where I come from, I don't know what country that was, I can trace my history back to 1783 to two slaves who walked up from Charleston to the upstate, so I do know that much, but I don't know what country I'm from. But I do know this: for me to be here, somebody had to survive the transatlantic passage. I have to honor that. I take great pride in the strength and the tenacity that it must have taken to make that trip here. So if I can struggle with these kinds of things, with tough conversations like this, with the issue of remembering and reconciliation, then that's okay, because somebody survived that to get me here. That's my first issue. The second thing is that I have great empathy for African American men. We all know many of the challenges historically that African American men endured. And I think that this project is a way to collectively honor African American men, but it's also a way to honor 5 men who never had the privilege of a funeral. In the Black Christian experience, the time of death is both a celebration, but it's also a time to honor with much excitement, with much celebration, and ultimately with much remembrance. These men didn't have the opportunity to do that. And so every time I see the sculpture, it doesn't make me sad. It's not a tough moment for me. I think that I'm honoring 5 people who well deserve that kind of recognition. Last issue ties back into my work. We talk about health disparities based on the social determinants of health, and we don't have time to go into all of that, but they're societal factors. They're reasons that we are the way we are, all of us, individually and collectively. But imagine this: 2 miles to the north of the emergency room, the average life expectancy is 82 years. We have access to primary care, we have access to ambulatory services. There's a beautiful exercise facility there. You can go anytime, almost sun up to sundown, and you see people and families walking and having a really good time. You can play some tennis, you can go to a Walmart market, or you can go to one of the regular grocery stores. Lots of lights. It's a great place to live. In 82 years, if you believe we were promised 70, so 82, you got some extra. 2.5 miles from the south of that same emergency room, 67 years. Not a single grocery store, not a bank, some pawn shops, no lights, not a lot of sidewalks. A few streets may have sidewalks, but not a lot. What's the difference? Who lives where? So when we ask ourselves, when you ask me why this is important, it's important because it's a part of my professional life, but it's important because it's a part of my personal history. I've gotten to know them all very differently. I never would have thought that I would call them my friends, not like this, but I mean, we've had some really tough conversations, and it's been okay.
If you notice, all around the city, he has his hands in installing sculptures and art. He doesn't talk about it much, but he does have his hand. And so one of the things that I love about this is my question that I'm going to pose, which I love hearing his responses. To me, I'm being educated today. It's a pleasure to sit here and ask questions because I get to learn so much. So obviously introduce yourself. And why is it important to bring art and sculpture and markers representing the 5 victims of racial terror lynching to this community?
Pressure's on.
Yeah.
How many of you have seen the sculpture? Raise your hand. One. A lot of you. Just to give you my background, I am the retired CEO of AnMed Health, President Emeritus or something like that. I retired about 8 or 9 years ago. I currently work for Julie. I'm between jobs. And when I was with AnMed Health, I partnered with Juana in our diversity program, and she and I both participated in the Diversity Leadership Academy at Furman University, part of the Richard Riley Institute. And I was in the first class, she was in the second class, Julie was in the second class. And so it's been a journey for me to learn more about diversity and to be better understanding of the differences among human beings. Because that's one of the big problems I think that we have, is that somehow God put this factor in our personalities that we have a hard time tolerating differences. And so it's one of these things that I've always worked on, very personally, to try to understand better. And I, like Stuart, grew up in a generation where the world was different, and there was a lot of complicity about racism and things of that nature. So it's been very important for me. With regards to art, Bobby mentioned my involvement in art. He's probably thinking about my involvement with the TBA steering committee or TBA group. Most recently, we've done 7 projects. Most recently, Pegasus. You've probably seen the flying horse downtown. And we were trying to improve certain parts of our city that were not that very attractive. I was also involved in the committee that brought the William Whitner sculpture downtown in front of the courthouse. And one of my favorite things was the founder of AnMed Health, Virginia Gilmer, the sculpture on the front lawn of the medical center, which we dedicated on April the 20th, 2008, the 100th anniversary of AnMed Health. So that's why I got into it. I don't perceive myself as being very artistic. In fact, I think I know a few of you in the audience. I think you're much more artistic than I am. But I do like art. And the reason I like art is because it helps me, and perhaps you as well, to understand things that are sometimes difficult to talk about, in talking about them, it may not quite come across the meaning or the understanding of what really happened. And if you look at this building, this museum, there's lots of art out there as you walk around, those of you who've been here before. And art helps you understand things about life, things about the world. And so early on in our discussion, when Stuart and I and Terence and Juana and Coma and Rusty started talking about, we said we can talk about remembering this situation with these 5 victims, but maybe we can try to take advantage of art to help us even enhance our ability to tell the story better. And we had, Juana had familiarity with Herman Keith. We started talking to Herman. He had a great grasp of what this was all about and what we wanted to try to achieve. And so one thing led to another. We got some funding from Duke Energy and as well as other sources. And by the way, if you'd like to contribute, we cheerfully accept your comment. We do have an account, a fund at the Foothills Community Foundation, and they manage the fund for us, and so we've got a little bit of money that we've gathered for future projects. So we decided early on that this sculpture and we talked to Herman a lot about what we were trying to do and what our objectives were. And Herman is from Anderson. He currently lives in Orangeburg, has a studio in Lake City. And he came up here many times. We shared with him the story of the 5 victims. And over several months, almost maybe a year, he put together this sculpture, which you see on the screen. And it has been on display now 2 or 3 different places. And as Bobby said, it's at Anderson University, and we are working on sites for it again. But when you see that sculpture, and when you see those jars hanging from that frame, it helps you understand the story and what we're trying to achieve in remembrance. Our challenge now, from an artistic point of view, is to try to find the kind of art that will help us tell the story of reconciliation. And we're working on that. I'm working on that. And as my friends here know, that's one of the things I keep talking about. We've got to talk about remembrance, and we've got to focus on reconciliation as well.
So, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question.
Yeah, I figured it.
So the moment that you met with Herman Keith, and you started talking and having these conversations about what this piece of artwork would be, and then Herman and Tim go off and do their creative thing, and then they come back, what was it like seeing it for the first time? Explain what that moment was like in a way that helps us understand how artwork can move people. What was it like seeing it for the first time?
Well, I think that's a personal thing, and all of you, a lot of you raised your hands. You probably all had different experiences when you first saw it. For me, it was very inspiring. We've been talking about this for months and months, actually several years, and when I first saw it, it just kind of made it real about the victims. And I suspect each of you had a different reaction as well. So that was my thought.
Thank you. You see this picture. Share your vision moving forward as we look ahead through the lens of this initiative.
As Bobby mentioned, my name's Terence Roberts, and I wear several different hats, but probably, one of the ones I wear more proudly these days is being associated with these 6 individuals. I mean, we started this journey in 2020, a COVID journey, and we Zoom met for a long time. I actually had not met Ancoma, before we started meeting. So, I grew up here. My parents were educators here. My mom was an English teacher, too. And so she made you remember ridiculous poems all the time. But my dad was a coach. He coached and taught here for 47 years at Westside High School. He won 13 state championships on football, boys and girls basketball. So I grew up here. And just going through this experience somewhat has made me understand how privileged I was, or not privileged, I was privileged. I was born in '59, so that was right at the intersection of civil rights and integration and segregation. I went to a segregated elementary school, then integration. But, just being around these guys and really diving into the topic, and every time I turned around, John Miller was asking me to read a book. So I'd read a book, and I'd read another book. And I found out I didn't know. Yeah, I'm sure. And I found out that I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. I found out that, in a sense, sometimes I just turned 64. I told you, I think I was in this community. I was somewhat protected from some of the things that parents want to protect their children from. And so when I started kind of peeling back the onion, I saw some of the things that sparked memories, things that they were trying to protect me from. So this marker, which came from Montgomery, my job was to store it and hide it somewhere. And so Stuart asked me to do that, and we kept it for a while.
Yeah.
We got it up here. I didn't realize it was that blue until I pulled it back. Because, generally you look at those markers, they're gray, black, kind of ugly. And so this one, maybe I did, it was blue before. But, just pulling that back just made me, the rush of emotions of all the work that we had done, but more importantly, just the work and the 5 individuals that were involved in these terror lynchings. And beside me is Nikki Carson, our major here, the second in charge, female, black female, at the city of Anderson. And I Bobby is just, and we're standing in a parking lot, or sitting adjacent to a parking lot that was a black-owned service station. That there's a plaque in that parking lot that we recognize too. So, for me, it was 4 or 5 years of work that came to a point where, and these guys know, we looked at everywhere to put that marker. We could put it here, and then no, and this one was right under our foot. So, there you go.
I got a follow-up question.
Sure.
So we made a trip down together as a group. I was allowed to join y'all because this is a serious group. They have a following too. Went to the Equal Justice Initiative, and one of my other favorite pictures that I've taken is, if I remember correctly, you had your grandson with you. 2.
Yep.
And you were walking, and I took this great picture of his face on the shoulder. And to me, it's probably one of the most telling pictures of just seeing in his eyes what he's thinking and what's going on, and you're right there with him. So the point of this question is that, why did you go, and why is it important to go visit a place like the Equal Justice Initiative from your perspective?
Again, I'm not artistic, into people that are artistic, but to go to Montgomery, I'm the type of guy that goes in a museum and kind of breezes through in about an hour. Okay, you go in that museum, and I knew because my wife had at the time a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old grandson, and I knew I had to get back. But at hour 1, at hour 2, at hour 3, I'm like, I gotta get back, and so it captivated me because, again, you go through it and you look at, and I can't remember who said it, but just the transatlantic trip, the sounds that they created in this museum, the videos, the sculptures. It is. Bobby might talk about this, but I think he's taking another group back, and we're sitting here talking about, let us know when you're going because we want to go back too. So it's one of those things. I think it's Montgomery's 5 hours away from here, and it's worth the trip. They've done a great job. Mr. Stevenson has done a great job of putting that together. We know a young lady who works here that worked for Mr. Stevenson, and it's like, she said he would like work 24 hours and just, I think the museum went up just in 18 months, and that's unbelievable.
Lynching in Anderson County. White mobs lynched at least 5 black people, including 3 teenagers, in Anderson County over the course of 17 years. On December 12, 1894, a mob of nearly 500 white men abducted a black boy named Edward Sullivan from law enforcement and hanged him near Williamston after a white boy was found dead. White press excused the lynching in defense of the good people who participated. On May 1898, after a white man's gin house burned down, a constable handed Elbert Harris, a black teenager, over to a mob of around 20 white men at their request. The mob brutally whipped and beat Elbert on the side of the road, and he died 4 days later in the Anderson County Jail. On November 24th, 1901, a mob of at least 200 white people seized a black farm worker named John Ladison after a white woman reported being assaulted. Denying Mr. Ladison's right to due process, the mob hanged him in Rock Mills Township and shot his lynched body. On June 30th, 1903, a mob of up to 50 white men fatally shot an elderly black man named Reuben Elrod. The mob then proceeded to strip, severely beat, and terrorize 3 black women who were relatives and caregivers in the Elrod home. On October 10, 1911, following a reported assault on a white girl, a mob led by South Carolina State Representative lynched 17-year-old Willis Jackson in Honeytown. No one was ever held accountable for any of these lynchings. Written by the Equal Justice Initiative and the Anderson Area Remembrance and Reconciliation Initiative in 2023. If you go to the website, remembranceanderson.org, there is a link to the sculpture, and you can read more about the sculpture. But there is an audio file that's roughly about 10 minutes, and it gives you the complete accounts of all 5 victims of what happened.
I think for me, it was the reaction of the faith community. We're supposed to do the right thing, and the Bible tells us, gives us a roadmap of all of the things we're supposed to do. But it was most difficult to get the faith community. There were some places where EJI says that you got to have at least 2 pieces of two pieces of documentation before you can declare a particular location. And so one of them was fairly close, won't give me more details, but fairly close to a couple of churches. And the reaction of those churches, well, let's not stir that up. You can come get it at night. It was just, and I'm thinking, but we're supposed to be the church. We're the church people. That was most troubling. You would expect different reactions from those who don't know who God is. He created us all, and we collectively are in His image, but we got to come at night to get the soil, and don't tell nobody.
I'll build on that because when we first started talking about where we would put the marker, we actually talked about putting markers at multiple locations when we could identify where the lynchings occurred. But we said, we don't want to get involved in any controversial thing. We don't, try to go get involved in any of the Confederate statues and the removal of all that kind of stuff. This is a separate issue.
Wow.
Yeah.
But
So,
EJI says not to, because they don't want one to be confused with the other, because there have been several communities across the country. That was the first place that we went. Let's go put it next. Well, one doesn't have anything to do with the other, and they wanted to make sure that it didn't become that kind of battle, because it can cause division, and often does when you go there.
but wherever we first said, well, let's go to the churches. That'll be the best place to go, as Juana said, and we got the reaction that she described, but it wasn't just the churches. It was several other organizations as well And the question we always got, well, why do you want to stir this up? You know, let's just move on. Why do we have to bring all this bad stuff out of the past? And we tried to say, look, this is important. This is important. You can't, and as Bobby said earlier, you can't really try to achieve reconciliation without remembering some of the bad things that we did. And our country has done a lot of bad things. It's not just slavery, it's not just lynchings, it's a lot of other things too. But these are some of the most prominent things that we've done badly, and we've got to own up to it and move on and try to achieve some kind of sense of healing. One of the lingering questions I've always had, even when I first started getting involved with diversity and some of the leadership things that I was involved in, is, what does it feel like to be a black person with all the stuff that's gone on? And I'm on a journey. I'm speaking personally for myself. I can never totally relate or understand that myself, because I've never walked in those shoes. But that's what this is all about. There's a lot of people, and African American and people of color have a different view and think about this differently than somebody like this white person sitting right here. And so I'm on a journey to try to better understand that. And I probably will always be on a journey, because I'm not there yet.
Yeah, the most surprising response for me was when we were speaking with a group about placing a marker. The response we got was, we don't want to take sides. And my question is, what are the sides? There seems to be one side. This is bad. This is a blot on our record. There are no two sides to that. And so it's been a 4-year journey of learning and growth for me, and my mentors have been the folks in this group, and I have learned so much about life as we know it. I just appreciate being a part of a group like this.
And thank you for what you've done. This is absolutely amazing, and thank you. But just curious about what those future projects may entail.
Maybe multiple markers. We talked about that. I mean, this one somewhat recognizes the space here in the city, but there's Williamston, Heat Mines,
Honey Path.
Honey Path, Dobbins Creek. Yeah. So
anything we can do to have conversations with other groups like this. My guess, many of you are it's like preaching to the choir. You wouldn't be here tonight because if this topic didn't interest you. But we're looking, for example, EJI has given us ideas about having essay contests in schools. Like I mentioned, I'd personally like to see us do another sculpture. This particular sculpture, one of the challenges we're going to have in terms of trying to find a permanent location for it is it's an indoor piece. It cannot be outdoors. I'd like to see us figure out a way where we can focus on some kind of sculpture or piece of art that emphasizes healing or reconciliation, and it could be outdoors. And maybe because I'm involved in the TBA group, I might be able to get them to work together. I don't know.
And we have found some things that are quite interesting. There's one pastor in Anderson who spoke out against lynching at the time, within a week of the lynching. Well, we want to tell his story as well. So Bobby's done a wonderful job of getting a lot of this material in a form that we can use it to tell the story.
Positive, specific, short, and personal. So the closing affirmation, which we'll get to in just a few minutes, is 5 words. And those 5 words just in thinking about it, Bobby said, you should just riff on the conversation. I'm like, dude, I'm a type A OCD physician. I don't riff off of anything. But it's sitting here, I was thinking that it's ironic that 5 words in this affirmation and there are 5 victims that have been lynching names to count. So I want to talk about beloved community, because I've heard that term. Dr. King was killed before I was born. But I've heard beloved community mentioned over and over, so I want to explore that. According to the King Center Organization website, the beloved community can be described as a global society founded on justice, equal opportunity, and love of one's fellow human beings. And in further detail, beloved community is a society where caring and compassion drive political policies that support the worldwide elimination of poverty, hunger, and all forms of bigotry and violence. Worldwide elimination of all those horrible things based on a nonviolent, love-centered approach. It sounds incredible. It's aspirational. But how do we get there? The society described by beloved community seems painfully far away, impossible. It's hard to know where to begin. When you look at the steps needed to achieve reconciliation, there are thousands. It's easy to get stuck, to shy away from task, to leave the process of reconciliation to others, to the next generation. That's the easy button. It's easy to maintain the status quo. It's easy to not speak up at the Thanksgiving table. It's especially easy for me in community because I'm a white male in the society. I have every advantage over anybody. And I have to recognize that, acknowledge it, give that up in order that others may be pulled forward. Thomas Jefferson pressed the easy button. I'm a graduate of the University of Virginia. On the back of my diploma, there's some kind of clause that says I have to incorporate some Jeffersonian quip or story into any presentation that I give. Thomas Jefferson talked about ending slavery. He wrote volumes about plans for freeing slaves. He said that slavery was an abomination, and he never took action to abolish slavery, either in the legislative branch or in the executive branch. He owned over 600 humans throughout his life. At the time of his death, he owned over 130. He might have thought that legislation and executive order was not possible. He said that slavery was a problem for the next generation to solve. Yet on his deathbed, he could have freed over 130 people from bondage with the stroke of a pen, and he chose not to. He sired 7 children with one of his slaves, 4 of which survived past infancy, and he only freed 2 of them in his will. He chose to let 13-year-old boys create nails 10 hours a day on his land because he, due to his spending, was over $100,000 in debt in the early 1800s when he died. Jefferson talked a big game, but his actions speak louder than words. So let's not emulate Jefferson. Let's choose a different path. Let's take action. Someone said today before that people remember and reconcile at different speeds. I am ready to go. I'm here tonight and involved in this work because it is the work of my generation. This cannot be kicked down the road further. So the King Center, every year on Martin Luther King's holiday, they choose a theme. And the theme for 2024 was that the King holiday asserts the need for individuals to spearhead positive societal transformation. And I think that's a pretty accurate description of what we're trying to do with AAR and R9. So I'm going to borrow the affirmation statement from the King Center. I'm going to change it a little bit. But the affirmation statement is 5 words. And as you go forward in your life and process this talk and what you've learned, and when you look at the website, I want you to think about these 5 words. Beloved community starts with me. Reconciliation requires trust. We can only start the path to reconciliation by using the power, the influence, the trust we have created in this community over time to have conversations, to start at the dinner table, to keep pressure on the gas, to not let the conversation die, to not let the memories of these 5 men die. If we don't take up this issue now, we are just kicking the can further down the road like Thomas Jefferson did, and let's not do that. Beloved community starts with me. Global elimination of poverty starts with me. Justice starts with me. Equal opportunity starts with me. Elimination of bigotry and violence starts with me. Caring, compassion, A love-centered approach to other humans starts with me. Beloved community starts with me. It is the engine of reconciliation, and let's start that engine. Thank you.